Okay, so the recording has started, but that's just more to give me some recording pieces before this thing starts. I already have your headshot. I've got your logo. I'll do that placard up front, and then there'll be a little bit of music, and then we'll show up together and we'll start talking. And at the end, I'll do the same thing in the back. But at the same time, again, let's make mistakes. Let's not worry about anything like that, and we'll go from there. Okay.
Cool. Sounds great, man.
All right. So here we go. Hello there. We're here today with the Alliance CAS Communication and Educational Series, and today's special guest is Matt Kuisle. Oh, crap. Did I say that right? Here's Kuisle.
No worries, Paul. Yeah, it's
with you. Every time.
Kuisle, but no worries. Matt with Reserve Advisors. No worries. Just don't call me late for dinner. That's all.
Ah, there you go. I want to start that one over again because I keep screwing up your name. Kuisle. All right. Sorry. Okay, so we're here today with the Alliance CAS educational series for board members, managers in the community association industry. Our guest speaker today is Matt Kuisle from Reserve Advisors. Matt, welcome to the program here. And quite frankly, Reserve Advisors works with obviously reserve studies. So if I could ask you a little bit, can you give us a little bit about your background and the background of the company Reserve Advisors?
Of course, Paul. Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to see you again. Yeah, I've been with Reserve Advisors 22 years. We are a nationwide firm of engineers that was developed really solely to help community associations plan for their capital repair and replacement needs through an analysis called a reserve study. My background is as a civil and environmental engineer. I'm a reserve specialist, a professional reserve analyst, which are some of our industry designations, and also a condo board member. For my 14th year, I'm the treasurer of my condo board. Paul, I know you know what that's like as well. So kind of have seen both sides of the industry, if you will.
Absolutely. And to your point, I was a previous board member myself, so I get it. I understand what you're going through. And as a current board member, you're crazy in a good way. But we appreciate that, not obviously because you have a different viewpoint on a lot of these things. You know, some board members just think about certain things, whereas you've actually engaged certainly for 14 years. That's a testament to you. So kudos to that. But a lot of associations, what I found when I'm talking to board members and to a certain extent, even community managers, when you hear the words reserve study, some people immediately know what you're talking about and others not necessarily know what it is or what it does. So just generally speaking, what is a reserve study?
Sure, great question. And the industry's evolved a lot in my time with it. I mean, 20 years ago, no one knew what a reserve study was. And now more and more communities are finding out what it is and how it can be useful. It's a long-term planning tool. It's a forecast of capital repairs and replacements. So what we do is our engineers identify the property. So what common elements you would have to replace or repair over time. We identify the condition of those items so that we can say reasonably well how much longer it's going to last, or how long until we have to paint next, or how long until we have to do the next roofing project. And we identify the cost for those items as well. So there's that's kind of the physical analysis part of a reserve study. And then the financial analysis side, which is kind of the results of the study, is how much is everyone going to have to pay in order to pay their fair share, in order to put back into the association what's being worn out every single day, what's being used up every single day, which is the life of our common assets. How much should we set our fees at to ensure that we have a stable, equitable funding plan that's adequate for those repairs and replacements, because that's really the ultimate way to ensure our boards are being fiduciary. So we're a consultant that helps boards fulfill that duty.
Well, you bring up a really big word there, fiduciary, which some people immediately know what that means. Other people hear it, either don't know what that means, or they get very kind of freaked out about it because it basically connotates that you have an obligation financially to the association. It's not about your personal views or feelings. It's about what's best for the association. And there's always been board members, and I hate to say this, but it's real. There's always been board members that get on boards for lack of a better phrase, an ulterior motive. And that can be a significant hindrance. Now, pulling that back to the reserve study component, the reserve study, as you mentioned, it's a long-range planning tool, but are there any legal requirements or any legal components that must be included in a reserve study that the associations, from a legal perspective, are required to incorporate?
Good, great question, and that really varies state to state. I know we're here in Florida. I know that a lot of our clients are in Florida, probably a lot of our audiences in Florida. There is not in Florida a requirement to do a reserve study professionally. So there is no specific statute that outlines what a reserve study should include or that it's required at any frequency. What we do have for condominiums, especially in Florida, is a requirement to include a budget with reserves. So condominium statute 718 says that the budget shall, meaning it must include reserves for roof replacement, building painting, pavement resurfacing, and any other capital expense or deferred maintenance project which the cost exceeds $10,000. So the requirement is more on the board to identify these things, disclose them as a part of their budget, but how they come up with the information or the type of analysis they do is really up to the board. It's unregulated. Now, homeowners associations, which I know you also work with as well in Florida, don't have that same requirement. So it's really specific, again, to the type of property and the location, the state that you're in, that would require us to do, that would require them to put a reserve schedule together. Reserve studies are only required in a few states, none in the Southeast United States.
Okay, completely makes sense. Now, from that legal requirement perspective, naturally, how you just kind of defined it, there's really no legal requirement for an association to have a reserve study. Obviously, the reporting on the condo world, again, that's statute 718, the condo world requires you to report on the painting, the roof, and the pavement, those three, and then obviously anything over $10,000. And associations can choose to acknowledge more, and they can do line items, those types of things. So that's a conversation for entirely another day. But since it's not legal to have one of these, associations that I run across, they look at the phrase reserve study and they basically think, oh, I'll do it myself, or I'll have the management company do it for us. Now, I have a personal opinion on that. I'll explain my position after you, but Matt, what's your opinion if an association says, well, we can do it ourselves, or we'll have the management company do that? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably depends on the association. I'd say there are associations out there that maintain very little property. We there's some communities out there that are very small. Maybe they only maintain a monument and a sign or a small swimming pool. They may be able to take that on themselves. There's certainly also board members with great expertise in construction and cost estimating that may be able to take this on their own. But generally, it's advised within our industry to consult independent experts, and for a few reasons. The managers certainly are experts at a lot of things, but they're not necessarily equipped or have the resources to come up with cost estimates and useful lives for all of the common elements. So it's asking the manager to do a lot. The number one issue I'd see when a board or a manager takes this on themselves and doesn't hire a consultant, and we often get hired kind of down the road a few years later after this happens, is that they just don't capture everything in their schedule. They capture the roofing, the painting, the paving, the things that are called out, maybe the obvious, the swimming pool, the fences, but there's so many components in communities that sometimes are out of sight and out of mind. And I think that's where a lot of boards and managers too can understate often, or just not state the fact that the plumbing needs to be repaired or replaced. The concrete restoration, of course, is a very, very hot topic right now, and it's very expensive, and it's a big item, but it's not really easy to see. It's not really easy to predict when it's going to happen and how much it's going to be needed. So most of the time when we see a board that's done it themselves, they may have very good estimates for the things they know about. It's things that they don't know that end up hurting them or surprising them. Most developers will put together, if they have to, they'll put together a schedule, but it'll be very limited. And so there might be, again, those 5 or 6 main items on it. And if a board takes that over and then has the manager, usually what happens is they're saying, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Manager, please go get 3 bids for this, that, and that. We got the numbers. They can get pretty good estimates on those items. But it's those other items that come up that, like I said, can surprise a board and cause a shortfall of funds for repair or replacement.
Yeah, you make a really good point. You know, all associations are different. Some are going to have more infrastructure, some are going to have less. And I think your opinion is 100% valid in that respect. My opinion on boards wanting to do these things themselves or having the management company do that themselves or for them is bad in general. And the reason I say that is kind of what you alluded to is managers are not experts in pavement, right? They're not experts in roofs. They're not experts in pool pumps and those types of things. So there's always going to be a shortfall in that general knowledge. On the same side of it, I would make the argument to a board member who maybe is an attorney on the board, but is a divorce attorney in this example. Would that attorney be the right attorney to actually do contract reviews? And I guess the end result is if you, the board, are willing to put your name on whatever you're doing yourself and then be responsible for that, well, then do it. On the other hand, most aren't, and that's where you bring in the experts like yourself and reserve advisors to show, look, engineers are looking at this from that infrastructure perspective. There's no emotions to it. It's just, this is what you found, and then this is what the reporting requirement would show, and the monies you should segment for so many years so that you can pay for these things down the road. But that being said, with reserve studies, they're long-term planning tools, and I think we all get that. But once a reserve study is in the hands of the board, are they obligated to do anything with that? Do they have to follow your recommendations?
This is a great question, and the answer is probably goes back. The only obligation they have is business judgment, you know, and it kind of goes back to that fiduciary duty. Again, there's no law that says you have to have a reserve study, you have to follow it. However, one of the things that kind of taking a step back, one of the things that is just very uncomfortable for board members, you and I both know it, is when you have to go to your neighbors and say, we got to raise your monthly fees. The monthly assessments have to go up. And you kind of mentioned ulterior motives. There are many board members out there who feel their job, the reason they're on the board, is to minimize the fees because they don't like this $20 increase that they got, and they want to find a way to cut costs and save money and not have to pay as much to their infrastructure. And that becomes a very touchy issue, especially when you talk about your neighbors. You're talking about your friends, people you live next to, having to do that. And I think that relying on the professionals, while it may not be again legally required, there's some business judgment that comes into play, but also it's that that faith, the good faith that you build with your neighbors by consulting an independent person and letting us be the bearer of bad news, or letting someone else be
right.
the person that's you know, the bad guy that's raising the fees or telling them that they have to raise the fees.
Right.
And it kind of insulates them a little bit. When it comes to business judgment, you know, business judgment includes relying on professionals when you don't have that expertise. So it's one of the really best ways to fulfill, again, your duties, to show good business judgment, is to rely on an expert and then listen to that expert. We do get many cases where a board will not necessarily agree with our findings. We come back, we bring bad news. Maybe they've been, you know, conducting the schedule for many years, and they said, no, we've never had to replace that plaza deck membrane. Now you're telling us we have to replace it. We don't think it'll ever have to be replaced. Change your study. We don't agree with it. We're not following it, et cetera, et cetera. I think a board can get into hot water there, but it would be more along the lines of, you know, a breach of their obligations for making good business judgment. So if you have, and this is also on the other end of the spectrum, you know, we're going to put your lobby renovation in the reserve study. You're going to put your pool furniture in the reserve study. Those might be items that certainly have flexibility as to timing, costs, you know, what you spend on. And even if you do fund them from reserves, you could probably get away with funding some of those items as operating maintenance. And so there is customization that you can do to your reserve study to bring it more in line with what the actual association's plan is. So we spend a lot of time working with our clients, really tailoring their studies, making tweaks, especially on discretionary items like for furniture and lobby renovations, et cetera. There's interior finishes. There's definitely more than one way to do that project, and you could look at different timings. So there's options there. But what I caution boards against is if you want to make those options, if you disagree with your reserve specialist, whether it's us or anyone else, go ask them to make the change. Ask them why they feel that item needs to be included at that time. And there's a good chance that they may be able to work with you or think about another option. But what you don't want to have is a report that is a record of the association that says, you should have to plan for replacement of the roof in this, in 20 years. And then on the other side, tell the membership in your budget that the roof has a 30-year or 50-year life, that unless you have good reason to believe that your engineer is incorrect, which could be another engineer gives you another information, then you're fine. But unless you have that, to make the claim that you would know better than an expert in the field really does call into question business judgment. And so that's why it's probably ill-advised to not follow it. Now, communities, and this is from a board's perspective, a board can give the community an option to waive or partially fund their reserves, at least in the current legal environment. So in Florida, so they could say, here's what we need to fully fund, and we're going to fund 80% of it. We want the owners to approve that at a duly called meeting. That brings up the issue to the whole membership. The membership agrees. Right now, it's only a majority of the quorum agrees to waive that full funding and put in place some level of partial funding. Then the board's again done their job. They've disclosed it, but they don't make the decision. The board doesn't make a decision to waive the reserves or to not fund a project that's been brought to their attention, because I think that can get them into a little bit of hot water, a little bit of liability.
Right. And obviously that's never the goal of the board. I truly do believe that the overwhelming percentage of board members are there to do the right thing, right? They're there for to be that fiduciary, to keep the property values as high as they can, to keep the property maintained and cleaned, right? I mean, and it's a lot of work. We get that as vendors and as managers. We understand the struggles that board members go through. And obviously we're just trying to help better explain certain things to make their lives easier and managers' lives easier as well. Now, the general idea of the reserve study, again, is that long-term planning tool that could put benchmarks of dollars needed to repair certain infrastructure pieces. The long-range planning can dictate whether or not the association can afford the projected projects that you and reserve advisors might expose. But financing those could be a challenge. So the question really I have is, what methods do you recommend, or are there, I should say, to pay for the projects? And let's just use a simple example. There's a pavement project that is going to cost $100,000. Well, where might those monies come from if that project needed to be done? Let's say reserve advisors established that project needs to be done next year. Where might those dollars come from?
Oh, our boards, our little mini quasi governments, really only have a couple of sources of income that we can come to. We don't borrow the money from China. We don't print our own money. We have to go to the owners and say that is our income source. So there's different funding methodologies, different funding goals. Paul, if we have more time, we could go into a lot more detail about the mechanisms of funding those projects and what the target, ideal target should be. But at a high level, I think that's what you're saying is we have an option to save up for a project ahead of time. We have the option as a board to special assess. We may have an option to borrow the funds from a financial institution. And then our fourth option is usually the worst option, the do nothing option, not replace, not repair, let something go. And that's it. And so being on the board is difficult, as you alluded to. It's a job of stewardship. And a lot of what you do on the board is with the mindset of what am I setting up the next board to do? When you're on the board and a previous board has either taken good steps to be a steward and to plan ahead, they put you in a great position. That's a much easier job than a board that maybe was doing a little what they call kick the can down the road, and all of a sudden now they weren't buying green bananas, and they're not looking forward down to the future, and they put that next board in a very difficult position. And so when a project like that paving project you mentioned is due next, it has to be done next year. You may have an option on that. You may have to special assess or see if you can get the financing for it. But the most equitable way is to really from day one, when that pavement was put in, to start setting aside 1/20th of the cost of the pavement every year so that each owner, whether they live there for 6 months or 6 years, has paid a fair share of the amount of payment that they've used and enjoyed while the time they were living there.
Right. So completely makes sense. I like to use the example of a special assessment. And those are the two worst words in all of association management. I mean, nobody likes that. But I believe the reality of a special assessment is it's just a failure to plan, right? We could blame, and we see this a lot, we could blame the previous board, and the board 10 years ago made a bad decision. You could blame and point fingers all day long, but the reality of it is you got to deal with it right now. Today's board would have to deal with whatever it is that they're dealing with. What happened 5 years ago, although impacts you right now, really has no bearing on the decision that you made. Even if you hate that board president from 5 years ago because he or she made that decision, it doesn't matter. You still have to deal with that pavement, using our example here. And special assessments, again, are nothing more than a failure to plan. Obviously, reserve studies, a significant component to show the dollar amount you should be saving and projecting to save, is a serious consideration that boards need to consider. But at the same time, like how you mentioned, the fully funding versus partially funding, right? Those are significant decisions. The good news is partially funding a reserve is not the board's decision, right? That is a decision for the ownership group. So there is a little bit of cover there. If the ownership group votes to not fully fund, well, okay, then the board is to a certain extent off the hook because the ownership group said they don't want to do it. And I totally get that. Now, the third component that you mentioned, which is where I come in, obviously, is the financing piece for these projects. And the reason I come in on this one is I represent Alliance CAS. We are a licensed collection agent for associations. And I talk to board members and to a certain extent managers on what feels like a daily basis who don't get the concept that when an association goes to get financing for a project, the bank and typically the lending institution is not looking at the physical structures as collateral. What the banks typically are looking for is the frequency of the payments of those maintenance dues, whether it's monthly, annually, whatever it might be. And that's where if you have a significant number of collectible accounts, delinquent accounts, Mr. and Mrs. Smith not paying their fees, if that number creeps up, then banks won't even touch you, quite frankly. And what I mean by that is that's where, from a collections agent perspective, that's where we get involved and bring that percentage down so that you can get financing. And we work with banks all over the state to then partner with the associations to better educate and let the boards understand this is your situation. These are your options to help and work through those projects from a financing perspective. But if your percentage of delinquent unit owners is too high, more often than not, you're not going to be seeing any financing, which then leads you to what, I hate to say it, Matt, your fourth piece, which was the do nothing, right? That's the worst possible scenario, but we do see associations sitting in that scenario, and it's unfortunate, but it's also real. Again, we're not trying to describe this as doom and gloom. We're trying to paint a real picture. What the associations and the boards individually do with that information really is up to them. But we want to be that stewards of good information and say, look, this is what's going on in your association with that delineated reserve study outlining every single infrastructure piece. Is the board obligated to act on it? No, but at the very minimum, to your point, they at least are put on notice. They know what's going on. And if they can use their best judgment to delay or do projects, then they're being the proper fiduciary that they should be by using individuals and professionals just like yourself, and to a certain extent, Alliance as a collection agent, to better the association in general. Have I kind of encapsulated that? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and it's kind of a pay me now, pay me later situation, right? And similar with Alliance, allowing those doubtful account, the delinquencies to add up is really not as difficult as that may be. Again, to your neighbor, that is one of the again, unfortunately, just obligations of the board to address and to ensure that we're not paying more later. One of the biggest things I still hear all the time is that we can't afford to fund our reserves, or we can't afford X, Y, or Z project.
Sure.
When you look at those options we've laid out, the least expensive option is the one of paying it ahead of time. You can earn some interest on that money. You're ensuring the funds are available when the project's needed, as opposed to letting something fester, letting it nothing in the construction world or infrastructure world gets better if a project's ignored. It doesn't happen. It doesn't cure itself. It's just like in many aspects of life. If there's an issue, something's worn out, it's going to likely be more expensive if we defer it. It may cause other issues. So the least expensive way is to stay in front of it, both with reserves and collections, to ensure that you're not incurring, and again, setting up that next board for a bigger expense than necessary because of an issue was let to go.
Right. Totally makes sense. Well, Matt, I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. You've given not only myself, but everybody listening to this a lot of information. Again, great information that that is a building block for a more profitable or a better run association down the road. So really do appreciate your time. But there might be individuals that might be listening to this. They might not be looking at the screen, but how might somebody reach out to you, whether it's a manager or a board member, to ask questions or to get a reserve study started?
Sure. Best way is probably email. Like all of us, I'm in and out of the office a lot and in a lot of meetings. So if I have an email, though, I can respond to that and before, after hours at times. But nonetheless, my email is Matt, MATT, @reserveadvisors.com.
Perfect. Matt, again, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and look forward to spending some more time and talking to more boards about reserve studies. Again, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate your effort.
Yeah, this was fun, Paul. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Okay, so now we got a couple seconds there, so kudos.
Nice.
So the good news is when this actually does post, I'm going to be putting your email and my email on the bottom. It'll pop up as we begin to talk. So it'll show your email on your phone and also my email on my phone. So again, the people who are just listening to this, they'll, thank you for explaining yours. The people who are watching it, they'll see it on the screen. No problem there. Is there any answers that you didn't like? Anything you wanted to tweak or anything that didn't?
I'm okay. I'm at home today. With my 6-year-old who's sick. You probably heard him sneeze a couple of times. I don't know if we can edit those out, or if it is what it is. I think people are used to it. They probably tell I'm at home. There's a picture of him right there, I guess. Yeah. That's him looking good. He's feeling pretty rough today. So I don't know.
I love it. I love it. So this will take me, this will go up probably Friday. It'll take me a little bit just to edit out some of the pieces. It's not too terribly difficult, but we'll take a little bit of time. But once it is uploaded, it'll go in as private on YouTube. That way I'm sending you the link as a private link. Then you just take a peek at it. If you're cool with it, then I'll upload it for the public group. And we'll kind of go from there. Okay. Nice,
man. That was great.
Right,
appreciate it. Great questions. Great job.
No problem, my friend. You have a wonderful day and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, that sounds good. We'll probably see you next week or something. Are you doing that? Any of those? You doing some lunch and learns next week? I think
we've got.
One.
Yeah, there's a couple. We're all over the map in a good way.
See you there. See you there, buddy.
All
Thanks,
right, man.
Paul.
Have a great one, bud.
Yep. Bye.